Cameron, it's great to see you, as always.
Great to see you too.
You had one of the easiest transitions to college from high school. You were super rambunctious in 7th grade, all over the place. You had the gift of energy. And then throughout high school, you just kind of figured this thing out. And then you transferred from Boulder, Colorado to Denison University in what seemed like a seamless way. Can you start talking about like what you were like in middle school and high school and then how you made that jump?
I had a ton of energy. I still do. But what all of this kind of helped with was focusing that energy and making it a tool for me rather than a setback. And that started right when I started working with you, figuring out ways to kind of customize my approach to school rather than just using a kind of cookie cutter format. If you take notes and you do this, you'll do better, rather than what we were able to do, which was find a way that worked for me. So when I went to high school, we kind of put in a system of how I was going to approach it, how I was going to advocate for myself and talk to the professors and really just, like you said, focus my energy.
Growing up with hyperactive ADHD, we just spray energy everywhere. And that's where people get frustrated because it just comes out all different ways. When we learned how to focus, and this is why you see so many people, when they figure this out, be so successful, when they focus that energy, they get really good at something. What do you think you did in high school to help you focus?
The biggest thing for me is always writing down a schedule. And that's something we immediately started doing. I would go in and we would write down on a big whiteboard. And that was the first time I had ever really just looked at kind of the layout of what I had to do. Rather than that being overwhelming, it's actually comforting. You can actually just attach them to it rather than just a feeling of anxiety about these assignments. And then when you just start knocking stuff off, you get on a roll, you finish it, and you keep going.
So what you're talking about is the brain dump. This has been around for forever. There's so much more in your brain than you think there is. So when you try to get everything out, we do it on a whiteboard, you can do it on a sheet of paper, where you're just writing everything on your list down. It starts with big assignments and it ends up with like buy dog food, right? And then you can organize it. But that simple fact alone decreases anxiety significantly. Do you still do that technique?
Oh yeah. It's a huge part of every single week for me. I still use a planner, obviously. It's important to establish that routine because it makes everything just kind of feel the same. It's the same week one as it is finals week, just putting everything down, knocking it out.
Yeah, so when you do this, is it every Monday, every Friday? What does that look like when you're on campus? When do you get all this out of your brain?
Typically, it's on Sunday night because it sets me up for the week. I can go to sleep confident that I'm ready. Sunday night is kind of my reset for the week in college. Yeah, I knock all that out on the paper. I get it in my planner, what I need to do when, and I'm good to go.
That Sunday night practice actually decreases so much anxiety throughout the week that it's well worth the time. Is that your experience with it, is to get everything planned out on a Sunday night so you can sleep okay at night and go into the next week feeling confident?
Yeah, especially if you're socially active in the way of going out on Friday and Saturday. You need to take advantage of Sunday. You can't just let that slip away and watch the NFL all day or whatever it is. At the same time, we've talked about this a little in the past, I use Friday afternoon as a big setup for that weekend as well.
So let's say it's 3 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. Classes are done. You can get a start on something that actually saves a ton of mental space when you go out on Friday night, Saturday night, or starting the next week. What's your experience with just knocking out that little extra thing on Friday?
My weekends are pretty jam-packed with my fraternity stuff, with just things I want to do. There's really no time from Friday night to Sunday after about 6 when my chapter ends where I have time. So early in college, I was extremely overwhelmed after the weekend where I felt like I was more behind than when I ended the week. And that feeling of drowning, I tried to mitigate by right after classes on Friday, knocking stuff out while I'm still ready to work and not in like fun mode at that point. Knocking out easy assignments, whether it's some little quiz or a homework set you have to turn in, whatever it is, where it'll take you 25 minutes then rather than stressing you out the entire weekend and adding one extra thing to your plate on Sunday.
With my ADHD, getting started is usually a bigger lift than the actual work. The fact like I have to get myself started, whether it's on Monday morning or whatever, like that's a huge lift. And that's really anxiety producing for me. And that's why when I'm in that mode, I have to maximize that.
Yeah, exactly. When you have your mind working the right way, you need to keep it working that way. Take advantage of what you're giving yourself rather than fighting against yourself.
I love that. And so when people transition out of our community off to college, out of state, and they really struggle with this, your transition looked pretty seamless. What other strategies did you use?
You just have to be kind of ready to go. It's important to, in a way, like burn the boats when you get there. You have to be all in on going out of state. Be there, be present, dive into it, and then before you know it, you're back for Thanksgiving break, whatever it is. No offense to my home friends. Turned off our group chat, turned off any notifications from that stuff, just to pretty much cut anything where I was being constantly reminded of home. I think 2 of them were going to CU. A few of them were going to other schools in Colorado. And they were all going to be around each other. And I had to make sure that my life at Denison kind of came first and to really focus on that.
I've actually never heard that point before, that someone did that. Were they bad?
No, they didn't even notice. Yeah, they had no idea.
It's funny because whether it's an athlete or a non-athlete, you're looking at social media and you see your friends back home and it looks like they're having the best time, right? They're having parties and you're out of state and you're like, I'm missing out on so much, and you didn't have that.
I didn't have to see it, really. And, it doesn't mean I wouldn't go through the group chat at some point and see what they were saying, but it would be more after the fact when I was already, glad that I had done the work. It just helped me really break out and, you're kind of on an island when you go to a new place by yourself. I don't have any family in Ohio. Didn't know anybody going there. So you have to dive into it.
Yeah, you did such a good job at that. A lot of times when people don't do well when they go out of state, it's because they didn't meet anybody and they didn't have that friend group that they developed.
Most of what you're doing at college is social stuff. So when it came to that, I had a few different strategies. The first one comes from my dad. He said to me before I left, say yes to everything unless it's dangerous. Be ready for anything. Whatever your roommate wants to do, be excited about it. Say yes. And that was a change from what I did in high school, which was kind of just say no.
You say yes, because then you meet a lot of people. And most classes start on the slower side. Most universities, they don't pile it on right away. But you say yes the whole semester, you're in trouble.
Yeah, then it will become an academic problem.
Yeah, very quickly. So when did you start transitioning to saying no?
This was also from my dad. Cast a wide net and then a deep net. So early, the involvement fair, stuff like that. Sign up for everything. Meet a bunch of people. And then as the semester goes on, you start having less time or whatever, you have to start cutting things out. But hopefully by that point, you can have a deeper net and expand those friendships, whatever it is. It'll happen naturally. But they'll never work out naturally if you never say yes in the first place and put yourself out there.
Like 10 years ago, the advice used to be like, if you go to the involvement fair or whatever, join 7, 8, 10 clubs. Realize you're going to be quote unquote rejected or it's not going to work out with 75% of them. But you still have 1 or 2 clubs which you have a great friend group.
Yeah.
That hurts a lot of people to know that I won't fit in all these things. And it's the people who could just take it for what it is that really usually would do well out of state. Seems like people are much more kind now. There's not that rejection piece like there used to be. It's more just kind of like a gentle easing out of it. I know I see a lot of students who they don't get into the fraternity they want, or they get rejected, or they don't get into a club or something. And they really take that to heart when the people who figure it out, like they try to join 8 of these things and they realize 75% of them just aren't going to work most likely. Nor should they.
Yeah. I think if it doesn't work, that's just the universe telling you that it wasn't going to work.
What did you do academically to basically structure all this unstructured time that you had?
There's way more freedom in college than ever before. You're on your own, but I just tried to use the same skills that I was taught here and kind of just double down on them. I knew I'd have to work harder, so that's pretty much just what I tried to do. I really tried to get way ahead of it when I started college, because I knew there would come points in the semester where unforeseen problems would come up. And when that eventually happened, I wanted to be ready, or at least have a solid base. One of the things I always say, and it comes from an old golf quote, is you can't win the semester in the first few weeks, but you can lose it.
I love that.
That first test you take, that's not everything, but if you screw that up, you can really screw up the rest of the class. So just immediately diving into those classes and trying to get way ahead, trying to go talk to my professors more, to the point where everything I was doing academically felt like, oh, this is too much.
Yeah.
Kind of. I'm doing way too much of this stuff because I was really nervous about not being prepared and ending up back home.
What most people don't understand, like when our coaches, mentors here give that advice, like go to your first office hours, you know you have nothing to do, or get ahead. I think most college students hear this like, you're trying to lock up my life. But we're trying to do the opposite. Like if you get ahead, so much mental clarity opens up and you have more free time to do whatever you want with friends or play video games or whatever. Getting ahead, we're trying to open up free time for you.
It's what we always talk about with discipline equals freedom, right?
Yeah. The old Jocko quote. It could not be more true for college students.
Yes, especially early in the semester, if you can force yourself to work hard on that, you'll be able to slough off a little bit at different points in the semester and still be okay. So that should never be the goal, but like I said, if unforeseen stuff comes up, building those relationships with those professors where you can write to them, just be like, hey, something happened, and, is there any chance I can turn this paper in a little late? That's always really, really important.
Just from an anxiety sense. I can write papers so much faster. I can do work so much faster. I can learn so much more efficiently. I can do papers so much faster if I'm not in this very anxious space. The hard thing for most people is that they need a certain amount of anxiety to get started. This project is due a month from now. And they're like, great. I'm like, can you get ahead? They're like, sure. And then nothing happens. How do you almost foster a healthy amount of anxiety to get started?
That's a great question. I'm someone who, in life, always kind of needs a chip on the shoulder, kind of like motivation in some way, where I have to create my own motivation, whether that's feeling like people think I can't succeed, whatever it is, or just creating a scenario in which I don't get this done on time. And the best way I do that is kind of pack my schedule, where there's enough time in there that I'm not going to be screwed up if I don't do this paper today, but it feels like I might be, where later in the week, I know I have a bunch of stuff I have to do, so I have to do this now.
What you just spoke to is time blocking. It's like if you block your time and you see it visually, I only have an hour today to work on this paper. That changes a lot with our mindsets. The other thing that works really well too is just structure. Booking a tutoring time on campus, even though the paper's due a month out, and just working with that person, you're just structuring your time. There are two different ways to come at it, but office hours, whatever. People who figure out that structure have so much more freedom. Do you go to the first office hours of the semester?
Yeah, always.
You said that's such a matter-of-fact thing, but almost nobody does that. Why do you do that?
So the first class and the first office hours, but the first class afterwards, I always walk up, I shake the hand of the professor, introduce myself, tell them I'm excited to be in their class. And it's always awkward.
Thank you for saying that.
Every single time.
Yeah.
But I always just feel like, at least for the next class, whatever it is, I'm more than just a name on their list. I'm at least some sort of somebody who they see when I come to class, oh, that's that kid. And you have to be okay with humiliating yourself a little bit. It's, everything is going to be awkward at times in life. And being able to laugh at yourself or being able to just kind of let things roll off you is extremely important, and that's what that is. But the first office hours of the semester is a really good time to go in there, and I always try to come with something. I know there's nothing you have to work on in the first office hours, but I always try to come with something. Maybe even if it's just I didn't really understand this, even if I did kind of understand it.
Yeah.
It's just to start fostering that relationship. I think the most important parts of the semester are the start and the end, especially if you just want to talk about participation credit and different things. I think people remember how you start and how you finish. The middle kind of blends together for everybody. The start and the finish give an illusion of completeness.
And the one thing that I've always really admired about you is you figured out how to break down systems and reverse engineer them for you being successful. This is what you're talking about academically. It's not a cheat, it's not anything else. You have to learn the material, you have to do the work, right? But the fact that you show that you're engaged right off the bat and before the final grade comes in, that's very helpful. Even when I was working with you, maybe I was so frustrated with you, I always knew you cared. And the fact that I knew you cared, that changes everything with a relationship. The worst thing about professors and teachers is that they're human.
And the best thing.
And the best thing, right? I didn't think I had that mindset early on. I didn't realize these people were human. And if they knew I cared and I was invested, I would generally do pretty well. I had to put in extra work, but that work saved me freedom on the back end. Next year, you are a guide at Denison. So you work with the freshmen. What are your core pieces of advice to them?
So something I live by every day is there are only two things you can control, and that's effort and attitude. Everything else kind of follows that. So if you bring 100% effort and you put on the best attitude you can, bring the best attitude you can, everything else should take care of itself. So that's something I always say to anyone when they ask for advice. And then for the freshmen, kind of the same stuff that we were talking about today, of going and talking to professors. It's an amazing school. The professors are amazing. The class sizes are really small, so you'll have a great chance to get to know them if you want. And just be excited. Go and enjoy it. I think sometimes people go to college with some sadness about leaving home, or maybe there's things that they're missing about being home, and maybe they have regrets about where they decided to go, whatever it is. So just being excited, especially a small school, can be a little off-putting at times. Just giving it the full chance to really be a good place for you.
Yeah, it's off-putting, but that's the gift too. It's kind of that wide net versus deep net thing you talked about. I ended up at a smaller school, and there were times where man, I wish I was at this massive place. But then when I graduated, I knew the names of all these people, and I had good relationships here. And I knew my professors, and I would try to ditch class, and my professor would call my room phone. That's how old I am. And it was just you don't get that at big schools. There's such an amazing opportunity, but you do really have to put yourself out there. So you spoke about how important office hours are. Most people like myself in college just show up and be like, hey, I'm at office hours. And they find them not that helpful. And they're like, you lied. Office hours aren't that helpful. You actually have to come to office hours with some type of plan. What does that look like for you?
So there are two things I come ready with to office hours. And that's something I need help with, something I didn't understand conceptually, and something I'm working on. Those two pieces give the professor a good kind of just insight to you're taking their class seriously. There's something you don't quite understand that you want better clarity on, and you want help with something that you're trying to work on for them.
Yeah, even if you don't have a whole lot of time to prepare for office hours, let's say you have a big project, even if you can take 3 minutes before the class and show up to office hours with a specific question, that changes everything for that professor. Versus hey, I'm here, help me with my work. They're going to be well, what do you need help with? There's almost a little frustration. So if you come in with a very targeted question, it tends to go really well.
Another thing about office hours is the most use I've gotten out of them is when I'm writing a paper for the class. Going in, talking to the professor, and having them just even subconsciously understand what you're trying to write about a little better by talking through the paper with them is enormous.
Because sometimes it looks so different on the page.
Exactly. And them seeing that for the first time is way different. Especially for me, I express myself much better talking than I do writing. So them also kind of hearing what I'm thinking directly from me, I feel always helps.
There's very few surefire things in school. One of the surefire things is if there's a paper due Friday, if I can get to that professor's office hours with it done on Wednesday, it sounds brutal. And I was but if you bring that paper to them, they're going to tear it up and it's going to hurt your ego. But you just guaranteed yourself an A or B on that paper. It saves you so much time on the back end, having it done, going to office hours, and then having them give you feedback and talking it through with them.
Yeah, a lot of the time they'll give you exactly what you need to change. And if you can go in and change those things, you just saw them grade your paper. What else are they going to find?
The person who's writing the paper is giving you feedback. That's it. And if they can't follow it with my ADHD, well, I need to talk them through it, and then they'll give me advice on how to restructure it. So
exactly.
That was helpful. Do you have any studying tips that you give freshmen?
The one thing I tell freshmen is you have to know yourself and know what works for you. So for me, I study in my room because all of my stuff is right there. There's no process of getting dressed and going and finding a spot in the library, setting everything up. And by the time I do all that, it's been, 45 minutes, whatever it is. So rather than forcing yourself to fit into a mold of what you think a college student should be doing, sometimes it's just better to go with what works for you.
Yeah, and thank you for starting out with know yourself, because by the time you got to college, you were a good student. For a lot of us, including myself, studying in my room is a terrible idea. First of all, for everybody, studying in your bed is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
You got to separate the two, because everyone complains I can't focus when I'm studying and I can't sleep at night. That's a mess. So that's kind of the one hard line. But everything else, for me, the factor that I have to get ready, that I have to walk somewhere, that I have to do all this stuff, that really works well for me. But I love how you said know yourself and be honest with yourself. And for a lot of us, like me, I would never try to study on my own at the beginning of this. My attention is just too poor. That's why I'm booking stuff in the tutoring center. That's why I'm booking whatever I can with office hours. And I try to structure myself for as much as possible. And that works really well for me. But you did a lot of hard work early on where you kind of earned the right to study in a room because you put in that work beforehand, which some of us don't have that luxury.
You just have to know yourself. And that goes with creating things like your schedule as well. I've taken one 8:30 class because my mind just does not work before about 10. So rather than set up an ideal schedule from whatever, because somebody said that it's ideal to take an 8, a 9, a 10, break for lunch, and take a 3, and then be done, or take a 1. That's not what works for me. So setting up the ideal schedule for me looks totally different.
Let's say you're working with a freshman at Denison, and you realize pretty quickly their self-understanding of how they are students is low. By the way, this usually happens with the most intelligent people, the people who have been just smart and able to show up their whole life. They don't really know how they study at the beginning. How would you coach them through that process?
Just trial and error, honestly. We're going to try different things. We're going to see what works for you. The easiest thing is typically not what you should be doing, whether that's going in a group of like 4 people and going to the library to study and I'll just sit there and talk. That's easy. That's fun. But that's probably not what you should be doing. You should be doing what is maybe not hard, but optimal.
And then you get twice as much free time to socialize later. Because I think that's a good important thing. Nobody wants to go to college and just have this miserable experience. Like, you put in the work, you unplug, and you have tons of free time, which is other people don't have. One last, let's say, non-academic thing. How was this transition for you to go out of state to school? How was it more seamless than most people have?
One big thing for me is I have to work out pretty much every day. I have to do something active in order to keep my mind from exploding. My ADHD is controlled mostly through just movement, exerting myself to a point where I can get it under control. That's what we did here, whether it was, catching passes out there or playing spike ball, whatever it was.
Physical activity is so important. Only about 25% of people like the gym. It's especially in college. It can be overwhelming for a lot of people, especially if you are more anxious. What advice would you give to people who don't like the gym?
There are many other ways to exercise. Going in there lifting weights or running on the treadmill is not even, I don't think, the optimal form of fitness in a lot of ways. There are so many better ways to exercise than just going into your recreation center. And again, you have to know yourself. You have to find what works for you. If the anxiety about being in there and being around other people is stopping you from going, you need to find something else you're comfortable doing.
It's not this fancy thing where I need to buy creatine and go to CrossFit. They're like, yeah, I know I need activity. The rec center is too much for me. Maybe I'm just going to take the long way to class today. Maybe I'm going to take the way that has all the hills. It doesn't have to be fancy. The other piece too that works really well for people with anxiety, I know for me, is if you're good with the rec center or that environment, booking a class. If I have to look up a workout program and I have to chunk it out into days, do all this stuff, that works well for you and me and other people. It doesn't work for everybody. That causes too much anxiety. But booking a class where you just show up tends to work really well.
Yeah, I think that process of planning workouts, doing everything, it's really fun for me, but my brother hates it. That's why he just tags along with me and does whatever I set up for.
It's the same thing as a class, right? Yeah. Getting that physical activity, man, that's just so important.
Yeah.
It is so important.
And it all circles back to, like I said, focusing that energy.
It's one of those misconceptions with ADHD because everyone sees how important exercise is for focus and anxiety and everything else. And everyone goes straight to the, I have to become a bodybuilder in the gym. And I don't want to do that, so I'm going to do nothing. And that's just not for me. And it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, like always, I've admired you so much. It takes a lot of courage to go out of state for school. And the fact that you did that and now you give back to people based on what you learned, it's pretty impressive. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
If you found this interview with Cameron helpful, please subscribe to our channel. We're trying to give as much actionable, helpful advice as possible.